Yeah, so Moe's Tavern from Simpsons. I love the Simpsons backgrounds. I'd have to say Waterton. Oh, a favorite data set to work with? I like the BC Crimes data set because you can see the riot from the Canucks playoff loss. My favorite is Beaumont Park. Analog. I'm a sucker for Nike. I like their gear.
Nice. Okay, that concludes the hot take section of the call.
So we're here today to talk about Synapse. Sorry, I'm supposed to call it Azure Synapse Analytics the first time I say it. So we'll talk about that. But before, we'll do a quick intro. So Tyler, you're a cloud solution architect for a data platform. Can you just talk a little bit more about the role and what kind of stuff you work on?
Yeah, for sure. So as a CSA, we're embedded into customers to help them be successful on the Azure platform and our technology. And so could be guidance and architectural decision making, could be technical roadblocks. Essentially, we're there to make them successful on our platform.
All right. And I guess getting a little bit more into Azure Synapse, I find that when I've been introducing this new product in our workshops, a lot of customers are really confused. I think the name is really throwing a lot of people off. They think that the data warehousing component is just gone, and of course that's not what happened. But how are you kind of introing it to customers, and what do you find are the main points that are confusing to them at first?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we struggle from a naming perspective on our product to begin with, and the biggest challenge is Azure Synapse Analytics is ASA, which is the acronym for Stream Analytics. So we're going to have to find a new acronym for Synapse because calling it ASA is just going to cause more challenge and confusion. But you know, the reality is it's just the next version of Azure Data Warehouse. And so what we did is we renamed Azure Data Warehouse to Synapse, and that was our next generation of Azure Data Warehouse. So we did a rebrand first. And then what I call V2, the product team won't call it V2, but I call it V2 was when Synapse included Studio. And Studio is that integrated experience that we come to think of as Synapse now. And so Azure Data Warehouse has always been around, it's still around, and it's just a subset of what we call Azure Synapse. And it's really the foundational piece of what Synapse is.
Right, yeah, and I think, so now I notice when we go into the portal now, and I think I asked you about this a couple weeks ago, but they're actually two separate, you have to provision them separately. And I think just because one of them is GA and one of them is still in preview. So there's one that says in brackets, formerly SQL DW, and then the other one is in brackets, Workspace, which is in preview. And so I think that can also be a little confusing. I know I ran a workshop where we were using the data warehouse component, but some people were provisioning the Workspace and going in, and then obviously it looks different.
Totally.
So I think the SQL data warehouse, though, once you're into that component, it looks the same. Like that didn't change. So what happened with what's in the workspaces and what does that provide?
Yeah, and it's a good point. It's the same code base, whether you're using the rebranded or renamed Azure Data Warehouse or Synapse, it's Synapse SQL pools. It's the same code. So the preview component is that integrated workspace. So when you think about how people work on data projects, you're ingesting data, you're exploring it, you're ingesting it, you're transforming it, you're loading it up and staging it to do data science models against it, and you're curating it to be reported against. And so there's all these steps along the way, and the whole intent of the Synapse Workspace is to glue all those activities together. So instead of, we always called it Lego building blocks when you're working with Azure, but every time you snap those Lego pieces together, there's some integration that has to occur, right? Whether that's security or token handling or some passing back and forth, and that just takes time. And so when you think of how we can accelerate users to sit down and start exploring and working and doing great things with their data that we always advocate, we just want a unified single portal experience to doing that. And we'll continue to expand the portal, but it's really come from a use case driven or persona driven approach of, I'm a data engineer or I'm a data scientist. How am I going to work with the data and how do I make that easier? And so all those activities just glued into one just makes that experience so much richer and easier.
Right.
And does that mean that more people that weren't maybe traditionally in data roles are involved in like the data process because of all those kind of integrations?
Yeah, I think just by the nature of the service, for sure, that's true. And if you think about, they're always very siloed activities. So you'd have, subject matter experts that are investigating the data, and then they pass their findings to an engineer who glues it together, who then passes and it was always these very siloed, not just technologies, but groups. So like really good point in the sense that now I'm in a single portal interface. I can easily pop back and look at the raw data, or I can easily look at the curated data and the reports that are being run against it. And so there's no technical barriers for me as a resource or as a participant of that project to get involved in more areas and activities. And you just naturally do that by the sake of you're in that portal, it's right there.
Yeah, that's a good point about the different roles all going to the same place now. I didn't really think about it that way, so yeah, that's it.
No, I didn't either.
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm gonna use that now. Thanks, Sarah.
Well, and that's just it. As technicians, we always think of the technical simplicity of it all being integrated, but from a person's perspective, it's great. I can go in and I can look at data science models that have been developed. I'm only a click away from looking at that, as opposed to going into a completely different service.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, working
Power
more.
BI too. Sorry, go ahead,
Yeah.
Sarah.
No, I was just gonna say, I only ask because I'm more on the application infrastructure side, and I'm getting questions sometimes around what does this mean for how we need to access this stuff that's in this other data service, where before it's kind of like we have our data teams do that and I'm doing this stuff, but now it's kind of like I'm as part of the infrastructure team, I'm part of those conversations as well. So yeah, it's interesting where the crossover is between all of our teams.
Well, and Sarah, on that side too, on the infra side, is you now have the ability for users that are working with the data to go in and scale within that portal. So if I'm finding queries are really slow, I don't have to phone someone on the infra side to scale that service up. I don't have to give end users access to services in the Azure portal. I can still keep them within that one Synapse studio experience, but give them the ability to scale those services out to get more performance. So even from the infra side, the nice thing is you've kind of broken down those barriers of users being able to get at that side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was gonna add that I like how they added the Power BI integration as well, because I mean, with the other Power BI, it was always talked about as part of Azure, and it is where a lot of customers end up using that as their visualization tool. But then when you're working within Azure, you have to go to a separate portal for Power BI, and it's kind of like it's its own thing. And so now that you can bring those reports directly in as well, and I actually didn't realize until a couple of weeks ago that you could edit them within Azure Synapse as well. So that was pretty cool. I think that's awesome to bring in the BI people as well to that environment.
Oh, for sure. And a good example of all of this coming together is with Microsoft Global Hackathon. We ran a few hack experiences at local customers here, and the one that I was involved with this week, we have we put an architecture together, and we said we'll have Databricks, and we'll have Azure Machine Learning services, and we'll have Synapse. But I found we did a ton in Synapse just because of that integrated experience, where we had on the hackathon, we pulled in client resources who didn't have a lot of Azure experience. They were subject matter experts. They knew the data, but they didn't have a ton of experience around the services. So from a very exploratory use case, we could get in, we could map the data. I didn't have to give them access to Azure Data Explorer to look at the data or to other services to do the ingestion. We all just jumped into Synapse. We looked at the data, we popped over, built a pipeline to pull the data across. And so all those, when you think about those data use cases, we condensed it down into a 3-day hack, and that was the easiest service. Now, when we go into production, obviously there's services like Databricks that are really hardened, and we can scale out, and those are great workloads to move really intense data data use cases into production. But when you look at from the exploratory perspective, like a hack or just you're looking for value or you're doing some sort of exploratory work, Synapse was super, super easy to do that. And I loved having, it was preview, so there was a caveat to it there, but I loved having access to it. It made it so much easier to get those users who weren't super deep on Azure, just using data and working with our services without knowing or having to know how they all glue together. We weren't having to grab tokens and add AD permissions. It was just, we jump in and start working with the data. It was so easy.
Absolutely. I think part of it is too, we preach a lot in the data platform space with this data lake architecture. And so your data should already be in a data lake if you're following that architecture. And then we would advise, I mean, one of the cool things about Azure Synapse is you can connect to it so easily and start writing queries off of it. You don't have to go create a service principal or do anything like that. It just works. So I thought that was really nice.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna just kind of say on that note, it compares to Databricks, and I'm sure you've got this question before, and I get this question every time that we talk about Azure Synapse. Is okay, this kind of sounds like Databricks because you're doing all this analytics, you have Spark-based notebooks. So what's going on here? What does this mean?
Yeah,
what does it mean for Databricks?
It was funny when I ran. So about a month or two ago, I ran a Synapse workshop. Actually, it was probably longer because it was pre-COVID. But we ran a Synapse workshop, and we're in the office, and we're showing them, they can use traditional SQL workloads, and then we showed them some Spark, and there was two people from one of our clients, and the guy's like, "We don't have to use Databricks anymore," and I was like, he actually shouted that out. I'm like, that's not true. So no, it doesn't completely replace Databricks. No, the intent isn't to replace Databricks. Yes, there are areas where they overlap, but think of what Synapse provides is open source Spark, and open source Spark provides base Spark capabilities. It does not have all the scaled out, fully supported capabilities that Databricks has. So whether it's things like data skipping or Z-order, there's a lot of performance features that Databricks has that are proprietary to Databricks that you don't get in open source. There's a lot more support for, whether that's support for libraries or just support from their extended team that enterprises need. So we work with a lot of clients where Spark's new. So if you hand them an open source Spark technology and say, start using it, it's not putting them on the right track for success. So Databricks, and the way I usually position it is, the Spark capabilities in Synapse is great for simple or exploratory work. Great. When you want to harden that and put it into a production setting, or when you have large data volumes or complex transformations, especially on the data engineering side, Databricks will absolutely outperform open source Spark. And so think of it as use the right tool for the right job. If it's basic exploration work, it's fully integrated. You can start with Synapse. When it's time to go into production, or when it's time to work with more complex data sets, or when it's time to work with larger data sets, Databricks is absolutely going to blow away open source, and that's just the reality.
Yeah, okay. So that's probably the best summary I've heard of it. I think there's been like a lot of speculation around what it means, but yeah, like I think. Databricks is a super optimized. I assume we don't support things like Delta Lake either in Azure Synapse, and that's a awesome feature of Databricks. I just lost my question, but I had a kind of a follow-up about Databricks. But I think that is a good way to put it. Oh, I was gonna say just in Azure Synapse, I think you're pretty limited into what kind of Spark clusters you can provision, right? Like it doesn't give you that much granularity. It's small, medium, large, or something like that. So you get these pre-configured options, whereas when you go into Databricks, you have a lot more control over what you're provisioning when you set up your clusters. That was something that I noticed right off the bat.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, as a third party, Databricks, they're investing a lot into that whole Spark experience, and they've done a good job pushing a lot of what they've developed into the open source Spark platform. So Synapse can piggyback off of a lot of that, but it will by no means have the latest features, the latest versions. I mean, that is all going to come from Spark. So for organizations that and we have a lot, especially, you're working with IoT, very large data sets, you're looking for a new feature. We're always kind of pushing the envelope on what the platform can do. You're going to be a few generations behind if you're using the open source version versus Databricks. So I default to Databricks for intense workloads, and I default to Synapse for exploratory, simple, or playing.
Okay, that's good. You heard it here first, folks. Databricks is not going away. Every single time this comes up, it's like, oh, so I can get rid of Databricks, and you're like, well, I mean, I think that the summary that you gave, Tyler, I'm glad I have this recorded. So now maybe I'll just play this out on my next call to be like, God, just listen to this. It's not going away. So
yeah, and it was never the intent. I think, and I can't speak from for our product team, but I mean, obviously leveraging those open source Spark capabilities is great. It opens up a lot of doors, but the intent is not to try to go head to head with Databricks by any means. They're the founders of Spark. They're continuing to innovate on that. They will always have the highest performing version of that technology, and they're a great partner. So they help and support those use cases where we're running into performance challenges, where we're pushing the envelope of that technology, where we're looking for new features and a roadmap of Spark. They're really hip to hip with us, so a great partner and a great technology as well, and it bolts on nicely. And you're right, like the first thought is that it completely overlaps, and the reality is it doesn't. And there's really good architectures and use cases where they're complementary to each other.
Right.
Yeah, I was on that note. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Tara.
No, I was just gonna say maybe I'm derailing. So if it's in another direction, go back to your question. But from that perspective, like on the differences and just what's coming new and what's currently existing, all that stuff, like of course the docs are kind of number one when it comes to like learning about the service and stuff. But when people are just trying to kind of orient and learn more about this stuff, like are there other learning sources that you would say are kind of better than some others when it comes to actually like getting up to speed on this, or like blogs or things like that that typically have like good explanations and like to help understand?
Yeah, on the Synapse side, you mean? Yeah, and I'm always a big advocate of hands-on. So if you have a use case, or in your organization, if you have a new project, I'm a big advocate of saying let's use that as the use case instead of doing an academic training of the technology. Start with what you're actually trying to do, that like the hackathon was a great example of getting exposure to both a partner and to our end client on the technology and the benefits of it. And nothing speaks louder than actually running through a use case like that. And then obviously if people they don't have a specific project, or they're not sure if they're ready to move, there are a lot of good online hands-on tutorials. And so, the docs are good, but it's evolving fast. So there's new features and technologies coming into Synapse. And if you think of Synapse as this glue, and we're starting to glue other Azure services into it. And that's really the advantage of it. It's not that Synapse is trying to replace what Data Factory does, or it's not trying to replace what Power BI does. It's really just gluing those services together. The code base for all those peripheral services is the exact same, whether you use it in Synapse or you use it in the standalone service. So yeah, I mean, for end users that are looking to get started, it will be a whirlwind because there are so many changes, and it's tough for us to keep on top of it because it seems like a new product like this, which is it's huge for Microsoft on the data side. So there hasn't been a product like this in a long time where we're really coming out with a game-changing technology, and so it will continue to move fast. And I would advocate for those who work for organizations that have CSAs in those accounts that are working with them, reach out to them and have them keep you in the loop. We try to do workshops and not necessarily training sessions, but like 1 hour, what's new on this technology within those accounts. And then for those that are at other organizations are just trying to keep pace, I know COVID's put a bit of a damper on our sessions that we run in the Microsoft Office, but there's always events that we run, and we try to keep we try to keep a good cadence of those. The challenge is with privacy of information, we can't get as proactive to market to people on those events. And so I would just say keep in the loop of what events Microsoft is running, whether that's through LinkedIn or whether that's through the Microsoft site, and make those connections through LinkedIn so that you're notified of any of those hands-on either training events or sessions that are probably going to be run remotely now, but great way to keep on top of the technology. And then I would just say get your hands on it. So less reading documents and more just think about a use case, what you're trying to do, provision the service, and start working with it.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we'll have show notes, Heather. Maybe we'll add all these links to the show notes.
Yeah, it's funny because in the past, what would always happen is there'd like be the textbook or a Bible of this technology that would come out. And I remember working with data platforms in the past, whether that's something like analysis services, you get this book and it's by an author that you always know, and they come out and it's like, here's the 2016 Bible of analysis services. It has everything you need and it has all the data sets to work with. And the technology moves too fast now. There's no way we could write a book to keep up with the pace that things are changing. And so it's just, you just got to get your hands on and work with it, and know that what you read today on limitations or features of that platform in weeks could be outdated, because we push, we have a weekly if not monthly pushes out of new features on these platforms. So Synapse is going to be moving fast in the next year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't imagine printing a book on any of the things in Azure. Whenever I see those now, I'm like, okay, next week I hope you print out your new copy. Like, it's not gonna last you very long.
Yeah, which I get excited. Like, I love it. I get super excited about it because, like, you'll see the release notes and you see all these great features. But I could see how it's overwhelming for our customers who aren't in the same ecosystem of getting the updates and staying up to date. They're just trying to keep their head above water as to what the platform can do. So it can absolutely be overwhelming for them. And that's where the great thing about Microsoft is we have such great local presence for customers. And so those could be local events or on-site resources like CSAs that can help them. And that's really our differentiator as Microsoft, is we have those expertise locally where other technologies necessarily don't, and it's much more difficult to get support and help and get up to speed on them. If I were to say my favorite feature of Synapse, I would have to say it's the serverless capability. So the ability to come in and run serverless queries against the data. And again, when we ran that hackathon, we had a bunch of disparate data. I didn't know what we wanted to load, what we wanted to transform. I just started hammering serverless queries against the data that was in Azure Data Lake Store, and I was able to do a whole bunch of analysis and preliminary processing of that data before I even started to provision services that were going to persist that. So for me, serverless SQL, and hopefully in the future we're going to get serverless Spark. I hope that's coming, but that to me is a huge game changer that is often overlooked.
Thank you for coming on and agreeing to be one of our firsts. So thank you.
the guinea pig.